Hello, Booktube. I just saw a video recently on Cam's channel at Wolfshot Publishing, who his channel just passed 5,000 subscribers. So golf clap to Cam. Very, very good. Well deserved as well. I'll leave a link to his video down below, in which he, with a usual bit of snarky sarcasm, makes a bookish pet peeve video after first pointing out that yes, he knows that every single person and their mother has done a bookish pet peeve video. And I was watching his video, and I was listening to, he makes 5 bookish pet peeves. I've got the list here. He did when it's unclear that books in a series when they're not clearly marked. So you pick up a book and it's not clearly marked that you're getting the third or the second book in a series. Number 2 that he didn't like was toxic fandoms. Fans that simply cannot accept that your reading of their favorite book differs from theirs, or that maybe you don't love their favorite book as much as they do, and they're vocal about it. His pet peeve number 3 was overpriced ebooks, where, you know, the price gouging that's going on for a simple stream of information, or as he puts it in his Australian accent, data. Number 4 was a lack of Australian bookish events. This was news to me. I've never been to Australia. I didn't know that, and I'm curious to know is that a perception problem on Cam's part? I doubt it, because he's never shown any perception problems on his channel before. Is that accurate? The rest of you who are in Australia, is it a fairly lowbrow country? That wasn't known to me, and it's extra intriguing, of course. And his 5th pet peeve was people who give away the spoilers, who give away endings of things. I had to strain to empathize with that. He called it a pet peeve of his that's so deep that it extends to all areas of life. And as you know, if you've listened to my 5,851 videos, I don't care about spoilers at all. I cut my teeth in literature. I learned about books and what literature is from the classics of ancient Greece and Rome, especially the Greek tragedians, where everyone in the audience knows the ending, where there is absolutely no dramatic weight placed on a reveal at the last minute. Instead, the shocking things for the audience and then later the readers is the way that the author handles this material, and it can be very shocking, but not the ending. But nevertheless, I do sympathize. I do empathize with it, because as Cam points out, and I think he was. It was revealing clearly that when he was talking about this pet peeve, he was talking about it at least as much from an author's point of view. He himself is an author. That the author puts work into constructing those last-minute reveals. You're doing not just other readers a disservice, you're doing the author's careful work a disservice to spoil them. And those were his 5 pet peeves to add to the pile of bookish pet peeve videos that are out there. When I saw his video and I saw he shows thumbnails for dozens and dozens of these videos, and it made me want to go on a video watching spree of pet peeves, and I think I will do that later tonight, especially if the writing drags. But when he did that, I immediately thought, oh, well, you're right about that. Everybody's done a bookish pet peeve video. I remember when I made my... Wait a minute. I don't think I ever have made a bookish pet peeve video. I have listed pet peeves many times in other videos, but have I ever done? I searched. I almost never do this, but I searched for my own name and bookish pet peeves, and I couldn't find a video where I did such a thing. And I don't recall it either, so I'm going to do it now. I'm going to show a little solidarity with my brother from down under and do a bookish pet peeve video so he's not out there alone taking all the brickbats for making unoriginal content. If he can make unoriginal content, so can I. So I have some. I'm gonna limit myself, just like he did 5, so I'll do 5. I have 5 bookish pet peeves of my own that I want to discuss just briefly. I made a list of them, and the first one of mine overlaps with one of his, which is toxic fandoms. Not just the kinds of blowhards that he was talking about, who simply cannot accept that you might have a different interpretation of their favorite book than them, or that you might not consider their favorite book to be the greatest thing since sliced cheese, but also all the other elements of toxic fandom that we have seen even recently, even in the news this year and last year, where, for instance, people would frenetically downvote a book on Goodreads while announcing that they haven't read it. because they heard something they don't like about the author, or they heard something they don't like about the plot, or things like that. Things that, I don't want to paint a broad brush here, of course, there are exceptions to every rule, but I think we can probably agree, it's a hard truth, but if we face it directly, we can probably agree that these things are YA things. These are people, the people who are doing this, the generous interpretation of why they're doing it is that they are unfamiliar with the adult world of conflicting opinions. They're unfamiliar with adult civility. So they think that sort of thing is okay. It's not. And the adults around them, especially if they themselves are young, the adults around them should immediately tell them that. So if your 13-year-old comes to the table and says, yeah, I'm sorry I'm late, but I had to join this campaign to downvote a book because the author said something horrible, the adults at the table should immediately stop what they're doing, put the cutlery down, and say, okay, what you just did was horrible. Don't do it again. And then explain why. That's not going to happen anyway because the kid would sue their parent and win. But one way or another, toxic fandoms. Yes, I agree with that completely. Then my pet peeve number 2 is kind of sort of connected to that, only it's the adult version. It's 21st century forms of censorship and discrimination. In the 21st century, under our noses, largely uncommented on, public censorship and discrimination have sort of crept back into the popular sphere, only without the stigma of shame that used to attach to them. They're now done openly by people who consider themselves to be quote-unquote free speech advocates. And it's loathsome. It's not defensible in any way. So I'm talking about, abominations like authenticity coaches, where one black person, one Filipino person, one lesbian person will approach an author and say, well, it's essentially a version of the mob. They go to the author of some new, usually YA book, and say, that's a mighty nice manuscript you got here. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to it. I notice you have a Filipino character while you yourself are white. I am Filipino, and therefore I am able to speak to the experience and thoughts and opinions of all Filipinos. Nothing racist about that. I can speak for them all. And I have pretty good hourly rates. Might be a good idea to hire me. Wouldn't want to get mobbed now, would you? That sort of thing is revolting. And its first cousin is the whole own voices phenomenon, which started, like most of these things do, from a praiseworthy source. Saying, look, there's genuine underrepresentation here. Look, this is the publishing industry. Look at how many of these books are written by straight white men. Look at how many of these, let's take a cross-section of how many books have black main characters, but the author is not black. The publicist is not black. The supporting characters, all that sort of stuff. That is praiseworthy, to point out institutional blind spots like that. But Own Voices has metastasized into something very different. Own Voices at its most virulent end has metastasized into you're not allowed to write a black character if you're white. You're not allowed to write a crippled character if you're able-bodied. You're not allowed to do it. It's bad. It's something wrong for you to do because you can't possibly understand their experience. Even if your job as a novelist is to understand the lived experiences of people outside your own lived experience. That is, of course, the job of a novelist. That has been the job of storytellers since the first proto-humans gathered around a fire. Deny that to storytellers and you deny them everything. You make them census takers. And also another thing that I really hate about Own Voices, in addition to the sort of content cops that Own Voice advocates have often become in the 21st century, is also the connected implication. You can't escape it. It's right next to the implication of telling an author you can't write X, Y, or Z character because you aren't X, Y, or Z in real life. Right next to that, right hand in hand with it, is those same people telling me that unless I am X, Y, or Z character, I can't understand that character written in a book. It's just deeply offensive in all ways. It is censorship, because censorship is coercing the actions, thoughts, or expressions of someone else with threats of force. And the force doesn't have to be physical. Threats of harm, material or otherwise. That is censorship. When you make someone change what they would say because you have power, either institutional power in your own right or a gigantic mob at your back that you can sort of lift the curtain on and say, well, be a shame if something were to happen. Can't control all of my followers. That is censorship, and it's discrimination. To tell a white writer that he can't write black characters is the same thing as telling a black character he can't write characters. It is discrimination. It takes away from writers of fiction the fundamental thing that makes them what they are. And it's alarming to me in the 21st century how widespread it has become without much pushback. That drives me crazy. That's how this thing starts. And also, along the same lines, of this last tedious point, is mobbing authors on social media. Social media has become a horrible tool for bullies, as I know firsthand, and as I'm sure a lot of you do too. It's become a horrible term for bullies who can mob the objects of their dislike and threaten them with real-world harm. And that's terrible. It's absolutely horrible phenomenon. There's no upside to it. And so, as we've seen in a couple of cases in just recent months, authors who maybe aren't towing a woke enough line get mobbed, and the people who are watching it happen, who ought to know better, the people who are watching it happen, who are smart and discerning and know that it's evil, just sit back and are quiet, either because they don't want to seem intolerant, because it's the worst thing in the world to be in the 21st century, or because they don't want the mob to turn on them. Shameful. Absolutely shameful. For instance, how few public intellectuals and writers came to Lionel Shriver's defense just recently, when she made comments in public that struck a huge percentage of social justice warrior virtue signalers as not woke enough, as insensitive. And they mobbed her. And that was terrible. That was a terrible, disgraceful thing to do, especially since if you read the transcript of what she actually said, there's nothing objectionable in it. Nothing that anyone would object to unless they're a censor. So that's my number 2, is 21st century censorship. I hate it in all its forms, and I wish its destruction. I want it gone. I do not accept it as the price you pay for writing in, the enlightened 21st century. I'm wholeheartedly a fan of the Enlightenment itself. Wholeheartedly a fan. Wholeheartedly a fan of an industry starting to look around itself and realize, wow, I guess we have sort of parts of what we've been doing have sort of been on autopilot. Let's look around for other voices. Let's really dig through our enormous slush pile and see what's in there. That's great. That can only be for the good. Everything else, the militarization of that, the fascization of that, no. Big pet peeve. Pet peeve number 3 is, we'll flip it around here. I made the authors the victims, now I'll make the authors the villains. Authors who try to critic-proof their work. This has happened forever, of course, but in the 21st century, again, with the help of social media, it has become viral, and it drives me nuts. Authors who make their battered, beleaguered main character themselves. So, you've got a writer named Joe, Finkelstein, whose main character is named Joe Finkelstein, and they have the same job, and they live in the same place, and their friends and family all have the same names, and their opinions are all the same, and yet the book is called a novel, and it takes Joe through all of his various hard on his luck, downtrodden adventures, all of which are easily mappable on the real Joe Finkelstein's Facebook page, so that you know that he's not inventing anything. And if it ends with a tragedy, or it's just hard luck, or even not, and a critic points out, well, it took me 5 seconds to determine that writing this book took absolutely no creative ability on the part of its author. This is not, in fact, a novel. This is easily documentable autobiography, and it should at least be billed that way. And even if it were billed that way, that would only reveal how poor it is as a work of imagination. In the 21st century, authors who pull this kind of trick have sort of institutionalized an immediate comeback, which is, you just don't get it. You just don't get what I'm doing. No, I get what you're doing just fine. I just think it's incredibly lazy, that's all. It's 21st century navel-gazing raised literally to an art form. But not only that, but also if authors weaponize their own personal tragedies and make sure that you know about them. So the era 50 or 60 years ago when an author would write a story in which a main character loses his daughter to a killer, to just an anonymous killer who is never caught. That story, that novel, would be criticized, hailed, sifted in part or in whole, all throughout the critical, writing sphere. But no one would know that the author's own daughter had been killed. No one would know that because the author wouldn't dream of telling it, of disseminating it. That was private. And it had nothing to do with the effectiveness of the work. In the 21st century, authors do the exact opposite of that. They make sure you know that they have undergone some version of the tragedy in their book. And I think the purpose couldn't be any clearer, which is to shut the critics up ahead of time. How dare you criticize? I've written a quote-unquote novel. My name is Beth Silvers, and I've written a quote-unquote novel about a character named Beth Silvers who's dealing with the long, protracted death of her mother from Alzheimer's. And I have said in many, many interviews, and I have volunteered for these interviews, and it's in the publicity material for my book, and I have a whole blog about it, that I lived that experience. My novel is not only autofiction, but it's tragic autofiction. So you can't really criticize it now, can you? You can't really say it's poorly done. That drives me nuts. That's dirty pool. And I hope that it doesn't work. I know that it does. I know for a fact that there are critics who are cowed by that, but they shouldn't be. The work on the page is its own thing. It's not a photo album, and you're not sitting on someone's couch. It's its own thing. It's a work of art, and if it's a work of art, it's critiquable. Anyway, one way or another, whether it's successful or not, it's a bookish pet peeve of mine. And then pet peeve number 4 comes from a discussion that I saw on Twitter just recently. A couple of people were talking about the unintentional pressure that Booktube places on people who are booktubers themselves to spend money on the latest book, to have the newest thing. And a couple of times in that discussion, Booktube's, again, inadvertent. It's not pointed. It's not intentional. But Booktube's inadvertent prejudice against libraries was bothering these people, and I wholeheartedly agree. I was nodding my head the whole time. And you might think that's the height of hypocrisy for me, of all people, to say, since I get 100 new books a week here and show them all on this channel. But I think those of you who aren't trolls the trolls would be my 6th pet peeve if I had room, but I only had 5, and I'm not going to give them the satisfaction of being in the top 5. But other than trolls, I think most of you would agree that my reaction to the new books I get in the mail is entirely enthusiasm. It's not, oh, look, I got this, I'm better than you. I intend to work on these books. I intend to give them critical attention as much as I can. And I watch a whole bunch of Booktube channels, including many, many people who don't read new releases at all. And I agree with the sort of unspoken text of that Twitter discussion, which is that Booktube really should have more truck with libraries. They really should. The plastic covering and the sticker on the spine, it was mentioned in this discussion that those are stigmas on Booktube. They shouldn't be. They should be badges of honor. Libraries are wonderful. I say that even though I don't really go to my library anymore, because in the last few years, I think you've practically seen the process happen live on this channel. I have largely shifted the focus of my reading to new releases. I'm published in many newspapers and many venues. I'm a working book critic. I don't, unlike a lot of people in my profession who have college jobs or whatever, I do only this. I support myself as a book critic. So it's my whole life. I think I'm justified in concentrating mostly on it. But correlated to this pet peeve and to that discussion that I saw on Twitter, I think I ought to do a regular feature on hunting for books in the library. I think we all should. I think it ought to be a nice Booktube-wide thing, maybe a regular thing, once a month or at a certain time of year or a certain time of week even, where we go to our local library, come back, turn on the camera, and not just talk about what we found there and why it intrigued us, but also talk about our libraries. I think that's a wonderful idea. We have some librarians as booktubers, and all of us love our libraries, even me. I belong to 2 here in Boston, and I dearly love them both. I miss them. I just can't... For my own sake, I can't justify it anymore, because I get all of these books in the mail that I am personally and professionally passionately interested in reading, which doesn't leave me much time to go poking around for odds and ends at the library. And also, the other side of it for me, I used to love the library because I would go and sit and write. I would soak in the environment of the library, and I don't really want to justify doing that either when I've got a puppy here at home. And a laptop here at home, and the worldwide internet here at home. So one way or another, that's my 4th pet peeve, is that I kind of think that Twitter discussion might be right, and we might be unconsciously, unintentionally, I say unintentionally, the big 14, 15,000 plus subscriber YA channels are doing it intentionally. They're not doing it unintentionally. But the rest of us, I think we might be unintentionally emphasizing glitzy and expensive new releases over the whole vast body of other stuff. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, but I worry that some gist of that Twitter conversation was correct. And then my pet peeve number 5 is connected with one of Cam's. He mentioned overpriced ebooks. And my pet peeve number 5 is the failure of electronic reading. It's pretty clear that it has failed. Sales of dedicated e-readers, for instance, the ones that use black and white e-ink, have plummeted in recent years. Sales of e-readers just in general, even the color ones, have plummeted. Figures show that even people who are buying color, internet-ready e-readers aren't using them to read. They're just using them because they're really cheap tablets. And also, in survey after survey, in study after study, respondents say that yes, they might have flirted with the idea of electronic books, but they now have moved back to printed books, to paper and ink books. And that's been hailed in all sorts of industry journals, Publishers Weekly and Library Journal and whatnot, as a victory. And I think it's a defeat. I think it's a terrible thing. I wish that it weren't true. And I blame publishers exclusively. In his pet peeve, Cam pretty much blamed publishers for hugely expensive ebooks by pointing out that the actual dissemination of an ebook shouldn't be that expensive. He's absolutely right. The actual packaging and bottling up of an ebook is not $10 or $35. I've even seen $100 ebooks. And the offense of the high price tag is made even worse by the fact that you're not actually buying anything. The digital rights little thingamajig inside the electronic file that you download for $35 can be removed at any time. It can be revoked from your machine at any time. You don't own it. You can't give it to somebody else. You can't sell it. And you can't hold on to it. If the original issuer wants to take it back from you, they can with a single gesture. But it's not just the price for me. Publishers, I think, are at fault mainly because they went for the price as soon as they could. They lunged for that extra money. And the speed with which they did it, I think, is a perfect indicator of how it isn't warranted. They didn't do it because it was breaking their bank to make ebooks. They did it because they thought they could. But no, it's not just the price. It's also that ebooks are failing because there was no imagination, no technological innovation put into them at all, by and large, at all. Think back 4 or 5 or 6 years when ebooks were just starting, when they were really starting to grab hold. Think of all the potential that was there, that was squandered, that was never even investigated. Ebooks, e-files, have stayed pretty much exactly the same in the whole time that they're alive. I don't think they'll ever completely disappear because they're so convenient, but they should have become marvels of technological innovation. Who knows what could have been done? Embedded videos, embedded visuals, all kinds of things, without driving up the price too much, or driving up the price, but unlike today's ebooks, you would get something for the extra money. There are all sorts of innovations that the publishing industries never even looked into, much less tried to see whether or not they would work, to make ebooks significantly different from printed books. And therefore a different kind of experience, something that readers would want to keep doing. Instead, ebooks were riddled with errors, they were overpriced or priced as high as a printed book, and didn't, in loathsome business speak, they didn't deliver any value to warrant that. And the reason it's a pet peeve is because electronic reading is clearly the way to go. It is clearly the way to go. I know some of you have very different feelings on this subject, but there is no aspect of the reading experience that is not better in electronic form. Not only is it not a gigantic deprivation of the natural environment, reams and reams and reams of paper, whole forests put to the blade. Not only is it not that, but also electronic books are instantaneous, they're weightless, they don't require a whole room to fill, they don't require bookmarks, they can be endlessly annotated, they can be all with the simple touch of a button. You can have it talk, you can have it narrated to you. You can change the font size if you're having a hard time seeing the font. You can any number of those innovations, and those were just the beginnings. Those were the ones that were built into the beginning and were never innovated on. Imagine all the other innovations that could have happened. But no, none of that was done. And I think we've missed our chance, and that's a shame. I was looking at that at the beginning of it, and I was thinking, boy, this will be great if it takes off. It'll be literally revolutionary. All of this waste and weight and, stodginess to printed books that will be gone. And all of us carry devices every day where we can read electronic books, and how much easier is it? If only publishers hadn't been blinded by greed and had made the process as enjoyable as it was easy, then I think we might not have seen a backsliding in ebook sales. I might be wrong about that, but one way or another, we'll never know, because I think the window has closed and I don't think it'll come back. I think ebooks will always stick around because they are so easy. But that's definitely a pet peeve, that electronic reading failed when it could have been incredible. And there you go. That's my own Bookish Pet Peeves video, which I'm shocked to see that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I did make one and I just didn't look back far enough. But one way or another, I know that I've never listed these pet peeves in this order before, so this is at least that. So it's now Cam and I standing against the world. We have added to the enormous pile of Bookish Pet Peeve videos, and feel free, all of you, to make the same. Because if there's one thing I love to do in a crowd of people I like, it's complain. So anyway, I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll see you soon. Thank you, Booktube.